We'd like to welcome you to Daybreak TV program, and our guest today is from Orange, Texas. His name is Rick Burns. His name was given to me by Johnny Moffett, a friend of mine since 1983 down in Dallas, and he recommended Rick to share his story with us. Rick, with the programming that we're doing, we're looking at having stories like your own that will touch the lives of people inside the institutions, will help and encourage their family members out on the street, and people in the church will get a better idea of what goes on in a prisoner's life inside, what took him there, how he's adjusting, getting back out in the community because he needs the support, or she needs the support when they get out into the community and that. So that's when Johnny mentioned your name, and I asked him, I said, is this going to be a cold call? Because that's all I was given was your phone number and your name. And so I said, was it going to be a cold call? And he said, no. He said, I called every one of them and I talked to them. So coming from Johnny, then I think you'd be a little bit more at home talking to me with his recommendation.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Johnny has been instrumental in while I was incarcerated and after I was released.
Excellent. So our friendship for the common Johnny Moffett and Betty, that goes back a long ways for yourself as well.
It does. Johnny was the second speaker I ever heard preach in prison.
Okay. All right. Let's take a look at that. The information you gave me, you have spent 23 years inside.
That's correct.
And that's a long stretch.
It was quite a long stretch. They said best way to do that is walk slow and drink a lot of water.
And how'd you do?
Well, I guess I did okay. I made it out.
Yeah.
You know, when I was sentenced in 1988, the judge pointed his finger at me and he said, young man, you ain't never getting out. But I never let that enter into my heart. And I always walked with the belief that I would be released and regain my freedom and my life.
What sentence did he give you? Because you're out in 23, but his sentence was longer than that, obviously.
2 aggravated life sentences. And in Texas, that's an eternity.
Okay, so you're in and lock the door and throw the key away.
Most guys with a sentence like that never see daylight again.
Okay. I'm glad you made it out.
So am I. In fact, it was actually, I consider it one of the miracles that the Lord blessed me with.
Yeah, you had mentioned there was a number of them that you were going to get into, like you started sharing some things with me on the phone. But when you were at the institution, you didn't want anything to do with the Christians.
That's correct. When I first went down, I wasn't really angry. I was just concentrating on survival. They sent me to one of the worst prisons in Texas for my first 3 years. But after I got off of that prison, things started changing a little bit. And then when I received the first miracle, which was Governor Ann Richards selecting me to be an inmate counselor at an alcohol and drug in-prison therapeutic community, it kind of opened up my eyes and opened up my heart to new things. And shortly after I arrived at that new prison, I ended up accepting Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior at a Bill Glass Weekend of Champions.
Now, Bill Glass has a great ministry in the U.S., and he was taking champions or sports personalities in, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. And so he's had a strong impact on prison ministry in the U.S. So they were having an event and you didn't bother going to it until Sunday morning or something. You were, if I remember right.
A bunch of my friends kept telling me, come on out to the rec yard. You know, they've got this speaker and they've got all these different things. And there was an NFL personality and then a couple of other celebrities. I don't remember who they were, but something happened Sunday morning and I heard them call it out on the speaker. And it just, something touched my heart and I decided to go. And we had it was inclement weather, so they did it in the gym. And it just so happened that Bill Glass was the speaker that morning. Okay. And immediately after he finished giving his talk titled The Father's Blessing, I went down and accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior.
All right. So then did you step into going to the chapel and that as far as your spiritual walk, or you had some time to think about it?
Shortly after I accepted Christ, I started going to church every Sunday. I started reading the Bible. I started meeting with the chaplain once a week. He said, he was discipling me. Now, I didn't even know what that term meant. I didn't know. He kept talking about bringing a worship team in. And I remember thinking, I said, well, this guy's a preacher. What's he need a worship team for? I didn't understand worship team means band,
Okay. Yeah, sometimes we get mixed up on the terminology, if you don't know anything of it.
And I was as green as they come. I didn't know any of that stuff. But I started setting up the chairs for church service and started cleaning out the ashtrays and started sweeping up after church service. And that's how I began developing what I call a servant's heart. Yeah. And it just continued to grow.
Well, I was just thinking when you were saying you were cleaning up the ashtrays, a lot of our churches don't have ashtrays in them, like, for fellowship time and that, but that's right. Part of life.
Right. And it wasn't long after that where Texas Department of Corrections banned alcohol altogether. But for a couple of years, I didn't smoke, but I couldn't stand the smell of those ashtrays and I wanted them to be clean.
Okay. Now in our conversation over the phone when we were getting to know each other, you had mentioned that by 17 years of age, you were an addict, drug addict, and you were an alcoholic. Did I get that information correct?
That's correct. I went into the Marine Corps at 17 years old, and as soon as I got out of boot camp, they sent me overseas. But on every military base, there's an E-Club. And at the E-Club, alcohol is very, very cheap. I think beer was a nickel and whiskey was a dime. And so my entire paycheck usually was dropped in the E-Club.
Wow. Well, you were overseas serving in Vietnam?
That's correct. They sent me to Okinawa, Japan.
Okay. And so you were 17, 18 years old when you went overseas?
Yes, sir.
To Vietnam?
Well, Vietnam was just coming to an end. This was 1975. And about the time I arrived in Okinawa was the time they were pulling the last of the soldiers out of Saigon. Yeah.
Well, a lot of them came back that did go in at a young age, and they came back messed up really big time going through that war. Yeah. So in 1988 is when you went inside.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And you finally got out beyond the judge's ruling. You finally got out in 2011. So you got your 23 years in and it was bye-bye and you were gone.
Yes, sir. And March 9th, 2011 is still a day I celebrate.
Yeah, like a birthday.
You bet.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you were dealing drugs. I think you were a drug dealer in 1981.
That's what it is. I was an addict. And back then, if you weren't independently wealthy, you had to do something to supply your habit. So what we did, we bought drugs and we sold off a little bit so we could do the rest,
Yeah.
and that was the way you kept the habit going.
Yeah. And then 2 friends got killed.
Yeah, and this all happened in 1981. Two friends got killed, and we went on with our life. Of course, everybody that knew them ended up talking with the police. I wasn't considered a suspect, and then 7 years later, which was 1988, my brother and I had started and closed an oil exploration company. We had pretty good success for 6 years, but we ended up losing the company when the bottom fell out of the oil industry in 1986.
Mhm.
And in 1988, they ended up indicting me for the killings of those 2 friends of mine.
So you had mentioned something about eyewitnesses, and I put question marks beside it with the eyewitnesses and that. But what?
Well, during the trial, there was 2 eyewitnesses. They were brothers who were waiting for a school bus. One of them said that he didn't think I was the guy, and the other one pointed at me, and he actually told the entire courtroom that I was not the guy. I was too tall. My eyes were the wrong color. I was too heavy. The description that he gave of the man leaving the scene of the crime wasn't even close to me.
And so you were given the sentence that the judge gave you, with the 2 eyewitnesses saying it's not you.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was actually a jury trial. And so the jury was the one that handed down the conviction. And it was the jury who also rendered the sentence.
Wow. That'd be a hard thing to walk into prison with that on your mind, not being the individual, and you're doing time for it.
Listen, I was walking in shock for probably 2 or 3 months. And when I arrived at the worst prison in Texas, I didn't have any knowledge of what prison life was like. So I had a hard learning curve.
Yeah, and you got to learn fast.
You ain't kidding.
Yeah.
And this was one of the most violent prisons in Texas.
Yeah.
Shortly after I got there, they had their first riot, and I had a pretty quick indoctrination of what it was like to try to survive.
Okay. When you went to prison, you were married, and now that you were inside for a stretch of time that they had given you, you had gone through a divorce 3 years after you went in.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And actually, my wife and I were separated almost immediately upon me going to prison. It just took a little while for the divorce to be finalized.
Yeah. So you knew it was going to be finalized.
Oh, and yeah, it's a common story. I would say 98% of the guys who go to prison end up losing their family in addition to their freedom.
Right on. You had 2 sons.
Yep. One was just over a year old, and the other one was 2.5 years old when I went to prison.
The reason I'm bringing that up, because in what you were sharing in our conversation on the phone, you started talking about the miracles that after you became a Christian, how things started coming together in your life inside the institution and then carried over into the streets when you get out.
Exactly.
Miracles that were, yeah. Okay. So you were remarried 6 years, roughly 5 or 6 years before you got out.
That's correct. In fact, I was Johnny Moffat's inmate assistant for the married seminars he did at Kyle Unit for 5 years.
Yeah.
I had the honor of them asking for me to help them 5 years in a row. And the fifth year, Betty Moffat had all of the Christian volunteers come up. They laid hands on me and prayed for God to bring me a good Christian wife. You know, our social life in prison isn't all that to speak of, and
Yeah.
but it was less than a year after these Christians prayed for God to bring me a wife that she showed up in a letter on Valentine's Day, and
Okay.
we corresponded for months and months. And then initially, she came down to meet me face to face. And after a few more months, she found both of my sons. I had lost contact with them. And for a year, she brought my sons to see me and would drive 3 or 4 hours to go pick them up and then come up to the prison I was at, visit for 2 hours, take them back home, and then drive back home to Orange. And this went on every Sunday for a year. And
That's commitment.
I married that woman.
Well, that's part of the miracle when you were talking on the phone. Like you had 7 miracles. You mentioned 7 miracles that took place, and that's one
Exactly.
of them, right?
Yes, sir.
So then, around I think it was 1983. That's when you were with the Bill Glass event. That's when you became a Christian. That morning.
1992. No, 1993. I'm sorry, January.
Yep.
I believe it was January 10th.
And then you mentioned about becoming an inmate drug counselor for 13 years.
You know, that is one of the miracles. I wasn't even supposed to be on the facility where this in-prison therapeutic community was. They didn't have any razor wire. They only had one fence. They didn't have guard towers. They didn't have dogs. They had one broken down van that was a roving patrol, and they didn't even have a man in it all the time. And so they was supposed to be for nonviolent offenders, people who wrote hot checks or did any kind of nonviolent crime. And so the very idea that Governor Richards allowed me to be sent over there was just mind-boggling. And I was there longer. They handpicked 10 inmates. I was there longer than any of the others. Some of them made parole. Some of them got in trouble and got sent back to the real prison. And so I was there longer than anyone else. They considered me the senior cadre counselor for that facility.
So you were not a Christian at that time. Were you a Christian at that time as a counselor?
I was not. For the first 6 months, well, I was by the time I was a counselor. The way it worked, they made us go through the treatment program. They actually made us cycle through it 3 times. And I ended up having to take the 270 hours for LCDC, Licensed Chemical Dependency Counselor from Southwest Texas State. And so once we had completed all the curriculum and once we had successfully completed the program 3 times, they actually gave us the title and the job function of peer counselor.
So when you went through the program, you said 3 times, and you got your LLCD. Is that what you call it?
LC.
I messed you up.
Licensed Chemical Dependency, LCDC.
Okay.
Licensed Chemical Dependency Counselor. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not real good with acronyms.
So even though they gave you that, you were still not a Christian at that time, though.
By the time I was actually a peer counselor, I had already given my life to Christ at the Bill
Good.
Glass event.
Yeah.
I was only on that facility for about 5 months before I accepted Jesus.
Okay. The one of the notes you said while you were inside, I'm glad that you shared those things, because there's a lot of people that they're given a long sentence and they don't do anything with their time while they're there. They just go through the regular daily routine trying to survive inside the prison just to make it through another day. You took you stepped into educating yourself and taking that program, and then you ended up, during that time, within the 23 years, you ended up getting 5 college degrees.
Yes, that's correct. I made up my mind after I got off of that most violent prison that I started out at. Things started to change, and my eyes started to open. In fact, getting my first college degree was what allowed me to get off of that violent prison. They transferred me down to another prison that had a 4-year college program. And there's 2 ways to do it. Number 1, you have to stay out of trouble. Number 2, you have to get an associate's degree, and then you can transfer down to a facility where they actually offer a bachelor's degree.
All right.
And those are educational prisons, and they're usually a whole lot safer and a whole lot calmer than the ones you start out at.
Now, you mentioned that when you went to Kansas State University that you had a partial scholarship from the school. Is that correct?
That's correct. I sent out probably 50 to 75 letters to universities all over the United States, trying to find some place where I could complete my bachelor's degree. And Kansas State was one of the schools that accepted me into their distance learning program. And when they told me that it was going to be $500 a class plus books, I wrote them back and I said, well, thank you very much, but Texas doesn't pay their inmates. So I don't have $500 a class. And I'll be darned if they didn't write me back and they said, okay, well, we will give you a scholarship. And they kind of asked me, what can you afford to pay? And they tailored the price to what I could afford, which was not much.
All right. Okay. Well, that's quite a journey. When we were going to touch on some other things that happened after you got out, but when you were 17 years old and you were a drug addict, you're an alcoholic, what got Rick to that place at 17 where he was into the addicted and he was into the alcohol?
You know, I had what I considered a pretty normal childhood, growing up playing baseball and football. But when I was in high school, even though I did well academically and I was on the football team and on the track team, I never really felt like I fit in. The fellas never really seemed like they accepted me, and be honest with you, I didn't really accept or like them very much either. And so I always felt like I was a loner, even in a crowd. And I really think that was one of the driving factors to me liking the feeling you get when you get high on drugs or alcohol.
Yeah. So there was no, you didn't want to be around Christians. There was no when you were growing up? Was there any church activity? Like, did you go to church with your family? Or?
When I was very young, my parents used to take us to church, and when I was in junior high school, I was involved in MYF, which is Methodist Youth Fellowship.
Okay.
And one time, my brother and I went on a church camping trip, and I smuggled a 6-pack of beer I stole from my dad, and we got caught with it, and they kicked me out of MYF, and that pretty much. I turned completely away from church and started hanging out at the pool halls and things like that instead of at the church hall.
Yeah, so you had some contraband on you when you went to the youth camp.
Oh yeah. And, well,
Okay.
we really just did it as a joke, but there ended up being a little bit of a scandal. And back then I didn't know the difference between the religions or whatever, but the elders in the Methodist Church didn't think it was very funny.
Okay. Well, when you got out in 2011, you were only out 1 year, and then you started going back in again, not doing time, but to minister. So
it was actually 18 months. Texas has a rule, you have to be out 18 months. But when I had been out about 12 months, Dr. Henry Holland invited me to go with him to the country of Ukraine to do a leadership conference for all the religious leaders in the country. And I really didn't think parole would let me go. And in fact, I asked several people, and they had never done it before, but it took them only 14 hours to give me permission to go to Ukraine. And so I went over there on my first mission trip for 2 weeks, and we did the leadership conference. And just like everyone says, it changed my life.
And you were speaking almost every night over there.
I was speaking every night. I gave my testimony every night at a dinner with all of the leaders, and then we would do the leadership conference, and we did several different topics and seminars and subsections, and I was selected to give a great many of those talks as well.
Question for you. After doing 23 years, you're only out 12 months before you started moving to the Ukraine, doing your speaking there. After doing 23 years, why would you go back in?
I was so grateful at the miracles that God blessed me with, and I was so grateful at all of the Christian volunteers who ministered to me and mentored me over the last 17 years of my incarceration, that I wanted to be one of the ones who went back in. And I really just wanted to go back in and reach out mainly to the guys who didn't have any hope and see if I couldn't give them some.
Okay. So then when you start going back in, you had mentioned that you were teaching anger management. Is that in one of the areas?
The first thing that I did was I went in with the Bill Glass Weekend of Champions as a volunteer, and I went on several of those, but also on my own, my wife and I developed an anger management curriculum. It was a 6-week class consisting of 2 hours, and every Friday night we would drive up to the prison about an hour away. We would do a 2-hour class, drive home, and after 6 weeks, I would give them a certificate of completion. And what I did, I got certified as an anger management instructor, so I was able to give them a certificate of completion that has some teeth in it. It was accepted by every state agency. So this was one of the few things that the guys could do while they were incarcerated that would still count after they were released.
Yeah. I think it's amazing when you didn't want anything to do with the Christians, and then you were at that class gymnasium meeting that you had where you accepted
Yeah.
Christ. Then you started, after you got out, started going back in with his ministry. And so,
And, the miracles that I experienced, several of them were biblical. We saw a song. There was 17 of us. We saw a song float straight up in the air. We were outside, no wind. The song floated straight up, continued to go straight up, stayed horizontal, and floated up into the clouds with birds circling around it. And it was a song that the worship leader had written for me, titled "The Lord Will Make a Way." And he had written it for me because I was the only guy on that facility who wasn't going to make parole in 6 months. Everybody else that came to that program where I was a counselor was guaranteed to make parole if they completed the program.
That's one of the miracles.
That's one of the miracles. And anyway, so having received all of these miracles, it completely changed my mindset and it completely changed my heart. And so I developed a heart for others, especially for those who feel like they're in a hopeless situation, because that's what I felt like when I first went in. And, even though every official, every attorney, every judge that my family talked to told them that there was absolutely no way I was ever getting out of prison. Yet here I am out of prison. And so having received all of those gifts, I just wanted to go back in and see if I couldn't give back a little bit of what I had been given.
Right on. So one of the miracles, you met your wife 6 years before you got out. You got married.
Yeah.
Then you ended up getting a house. You got a home.
She had already bought this home in Orange, and she actually bought it with the intention of setting up a place for me to be able to parole to.
Okay. And then your boys that you never had a relationship with, if I got the story correct,
that is correct. They came to visit me a few times when they were small, but as they got older, their mom didn't bring them to see me hardly ever. And then once they were grown, when they went out on their own and moved away from their mom, I had completely lost touch with them. Didn't know where they were, and my wife found them and was bringing them to me. But after I was released, they both kind of kept their eye on me for over 6 months. They had been told quite a few stories about me, and none of them were very complimentary. But after like 6 months, my oldest son had been watching me, and he found out that my words actually matched up with my actions, and that I wasn't the monster he had been told that I was. So him and his wife quit their jobs in Houston and moved within 5 minutes of our front door. And it wasn't long after that my youngest son did the same thing.
You got your family back.
I got everything back. Both boys live 5 minutes from here. Like I told my wife, it's a mixed blessing. She never had any kids of her own, and so she inherited a family when she married me. But we have been blessed with our children and our grandchildren, and everything that I lost was given right back to me.
Yeah. That's a powerful story to share going back in, because so many people, you went in with a sentence. You said that was 5 or 6 years after that you became a Christian in prison, but
Right.
You went in with this heavy sentence that you're never getting out. And then things started coming together in the prison, and it continued. It wasn't just what some people call it, a religious thing that you did just to get out. And here, your family got back together. You're going back in to let the other fellas know inside. Are they going to have the same thing? No, but you get God involved with your life, and things will change, and it'll go in the right direction for you.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest compliments I've ever been given was when we go in and do the crusades at multiple units. I always have one or two guys come up to me and that say, "Thank you, Rick. You've given me hope." And that's the greatest gift I could give anyone.
Yep. Because there's a lot of them in there with a long sentence. Don't know how they're going to get around this thing.
I remember one time I was standing in line at the commissary, and this guy came up to me and he said, "Rick, I've been watching you." He had been on the facility for about 5 months. He was about ready to go home. This is at the treatment program. He said, "I've been watching you since I got here." And he said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "I would rather see a sermon than hear a sermon any day." Yeah. And he said, "And I've been watching you, and you never do anything different than what you say."
So you're solid.
Well, I was just doing the best I could. Like I said, I had to learn the hard way. I was trying to learn how to walk as a Christian, and I had no idea how to do it. So I just did it the way I saw my chaplain and Johnny Moffett and Bill Glass, and I tried to just act and talk like they did, and let God do the rest.
Yep. I get little postings when I get a phrase or something that someone shares, and one of them says, when they show you who they are, believe them. So if what they show you is not a good thing, they're lying, they're stealing, they're doing this and that, believe that that's what they are. But when you come in and you're sharing your faith and you're sharing hope, and then what this gentleman said to you, he watched you, then he believed you.
Yeah, exactly. And
that speaks louder than words.
He said that it was life-changing just watching me. He didn't hang out with me. He wasn't a friend. He was just kind of a quiet guy, stayed to himself, and I never really thought much about him. But you never really know who's watching. We always know God's watching, though.
Yeah. What would you say to the folks that are watching this program? What encouragement would you give them as far as where they're at now? And they're looking to get out, and they're dealing with their alcohol addictions, and the drug addictions still go on inside the institutions. I replaced chaplains in maximum security institutions. They still make their home brew inside the prison.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So just because it's in a prison doesn't mean the drugs aren't there and the alcohol isn't there. What would you tell folks that are trying to, I got to get my life straightened out? What do I do?
I made a decision shortly after I went to prison that however long I was going to be there, I was going to make every day count for the most that I possibly could. That I wasn't going to just let it mark off days on a calendar, that I was going to benefit it, and that I was going to do everything I could to make myself and benefit from it, to make myself a better man, a better father. I tried to be the best long-distance father I could. I stayed away from the gambling. I stayed away from the alcohol. I stayed away from the drugs. Like I said, I was a work in progress. So I was having to learn the hard way. And it's not easy to stay away from all that stuff because it's right there at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And I had guys offer me a bunch of times to drink some of their home brew or go out on the rec yard and smoke a joint. And I didn't have any desire to get mixed back up. I knew I had left that life behind, and I knew how much pain the alcohol and drugs had caused me before I went to prison. And I just made up my mind that I wasn't going to open that door again. But I just wanted to make every day count. And I said, if I'm going to give them every reason possible to let me out, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to become better, to educate myself, and to raise myself up to a higher standard. And then, of course, once I met Bill Glass and Johnny Moffitt and Betty Moffitt and some of the other Christians that came in with them, that gave me something to look at and something to strive for. So I started trying to make myself into their image and live up to their standards.
Well, you've done well.
Well, I tell you what, it was all, I'm telling you, it wasn't me. I know people are always saying, it was with the help of the Lord, but
Exactly.
everything that I have done, every success that I have had in prison and out was because the Lord saw fit to forgive me and bless me and give me the grace and mercy to go forward.
And you made the right choices.
Oh, listen, I mean, it's like I've got the Midas touch as a Christian.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of money. But every time somebody asks me to go on a mission trip, I have just enough money to go do it. I keep a bag packed, and every time I get an invitation to come speak or minister to someone in a prison a long ways away, I have just enough funds to go do it. I've been able to do everything that the Lord has given me an appointment to do.
And what he did for you, he can do for somebody else.
Well, see, and that's the thing. I tell them every time I'm doing a speaking engagement in the prison, I tell them I'm just a regular old country boy. And what I'm telling you is that I'm not tooting, woo hoo hoo, look what Rick Burns can do. I said, but woo hoo hoo, look what the Lord can do with a dumbass country boy who made a slew of mistakes and still has been blessed by everything that God promises us.
He turned it around.
Yeah, and we've got our own ministry now. My biggest calling card isn't the 5 college degrees. Nobody cares about that. My biggest calling card is doing 23 years and getting off of drugs and alcohol and starting our own ministry. I'm a crusade provider for TDC now. I can do virtually anything I want to do on any facility because they know I'm not going to do anything out of line. And they give me a free rein.
So you said TDC, that's Texas Department of Corrections?
Texas Department of Corrections. Okay. It's actually TDCJ now. They changed, they changed it. I think somebody probably got a little money for changing the letterhead.
Confused the masses.
Right. Texas Department of Criminal Justice. But they've accepted my anger management seminars, our parenting seminars. I help Johnny and Betty Moffitt with the marriage seminars, and we are just given a blank check when we walk into the prisons. And the only thing is I always try to get more time than they'll give me.
Yeah, and the time inside, as far as when you're going in as a volunteer and you're going in to minister, the time seems to go by very quickly in there. You've only got so much time with them.
Correct. There's always one more thing to say or one more guy to pray for.
Yeah. This has been a delight talking to you, and I'm grateful that Johnny got a hold of you and you were kind enough to come on the program with us. You got a powerful story. I usually share this. This is not our final interview. Well, I hope that we stay in touch with each other and we can get updates from you and see how things are going.
Absolutely, Royce. I would welcome staying in touch with you and speaking with you on a regular basis.
Right. Well, I got your number. You got mine.
Fantastic. Well,
Okay.
Listen, this has been a real honor, and I want to thank you for reaching out to me. I always feel good about sharing my story. And that's one thing I tell the fellas when I go into prison, because they ask the darndest questions. And I tell them, I said, you know what? I'll answer any question you ask. What I do, I keep my life as an open book now, because it's too hard to keep track of the lies. So all I got to do is tell you how it is, and that's easy to do.
Well, God bless you. Your miracles aren't ended yet. They're only starting.
Amen. Well, your book is on the way, Royce.
Thank you.
Only Jesus, only Jesus, only Jesus can set the captive free.